Hello guys and welcome to Miss Terrifica. Today we have a new original story. Let me know what you think about it in the comment. You can also like the video and subscribe if you're new here. Thank you. Look, I'm not saying I had the worst luck in romance. I'm just saying that if there was an award for most creative ways to get rejected, I'd have a trophy case that would make athletes jealous. There was Marcus from the Baker's District who literally ran away mid-conversation when I tried to tell him I like to smile. Then Sienna from the Textile Guild, who laughed so hard at my love poem that she cried. Actual tears. And let's not even talk about Dane, who told me I was like a sister exactly 3 minutes after I'd spent 2 weeks perfecting a confession speech. By the time I turned 22, I'd pretty much accepted my fate. I was Lyra Marivalli, great friend, enthusiastic conversationalist, absolute disaster in the romance department. My parents kept saying things like, the right person will appreciate you, and maybe you're just too much for them, which, honestly, didn't help. Too much. That phrase haunted me. Too talkative. Too enthusiastic.
Too of me.
So I did what any reasonable person would do. I threw myself into work. I was a scribe at the Merchant's Archive, which sounds boring but actually meant I got to organize trade agreements and occasionally eavesdrop on dramatic contract disputes. It was perfect for someone who asked too many questions and had opinions about everything. That's where I was, elbow deep in a shipping manifest controversy, when the Imperial summons arrived. You know those moments in life where everything just stops? Where the universe takes a hard left turn and you're just standing there like, wait, what?
Yeah, that.
The Imperial seal. On a letter. Addressed to me. Lyra Marivalli. My supervisor read aloud, because apparently my personal correspondence was everyone's business now. You are hereby requested to present yourself at the Imperial Palace for consideration as a potential bride to His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Cashin Valori. The entire office went silent. Then everyone started talking at once. I just stood there, holding a quill, with ink dripping onto my favorite shoes. There's been a mistake, I said for approximately the 40th time as the Imperial carriage rolled through the palace gates. The attendant, a severe woman named Helene who looked like she'd never smiled in her life, didn't even glance my way. The Imperial Selection Committee does not make mistakes. But I'm nobody. I'm a scribe. I organize invoices. You are the daughter of a respected merchant family with an excellent education and no scandal attached to your name. She finally looked at me, her expression suggesting I was a particularly tedious puzzle. You meet the criteria. The criteria. Like I was applying for a job filing paperwork, not marrying the most powerful person in the realm. Let me paint you a picture of Emperor Cashin Valori because every citizen of the Valorian Empire knew exactly who he was. He'd taken the throne at 25 after his father's death, and in the 5 years since, he'd been effective, ruthlessly fair, politically brilliant, also distant, cold, and about as approachable as a marble statue. Oh, and gorgeous. Because of course he was. Dark hair, sharp features, and these intense gray eyes that apparently could silence a room just by existing. I'd seen him exactly once, during a public address in the Capitol Square. He'd spoken for maybe 10 minutes, something about trade reforms, and his voice had been smooth and controlled, and had made my friend Mira actually sigh out loud. I had not sighed. I'd been too busy wondering why someone so young looked so tired. The palace was exactly as overwhelming as you'd imagine. All marble columns and gold leaf and tapestries that probably cost more than my childhood home. Servants moved through the halls like ghosts, silent and efficient. I was shown to a suite of rooms that were bigger than my entire apartment. There were multiple rooms. Just for me. For one night, maybe two, before they realized this was absurd and sent me home. The Emperor will meet with each candidate tomorrow, Helene informed me. You will be called when it is your turn. Do you try to make a favorable impression? Right. I said weakly. Favorable impression.
Got it.
She left, and I immediately collapsed onto a chair that was somehow both beautiful and uncomfortable, which felt like a metaphor for this entire situation. Here's the thing about rejection. After a while, you start expecting it. You walk into every situation already braced for impact. So sitting there in that ridiculous palace room, I wasn't thinking about winning. I was thinking about how quickly I could get this over with and go back to my normal life. I didn't let myself hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was how you got hurt. The next morning, I was summoned. There were 6 other candidates, I'd learned. All of them beautiful, poised, daughters of nobles and high-ranking officials. One of them, Lady Seraphine, had actually looked me up and down and said, "Oh, how quaint." I'd smiled and replied, "Thanks. I got this dress on sale," which made her look confused and slightly horrified. So yeah, I was feeling great about my chances. The throne room was designed to intimidate. Massive, soaring ceilings. And at the far end, on a dais, sat Emperor Cashin. He looked exactly like his portraits, except somehow more real, more present. He wore dark formal robes with silver embroidery, and he sat with perfect posture, one hand resting on the arm of the throne. His expression was carefully neutral. Those gray eyes tracked my approach, and I felt immediately, acutely aware of every awkward thing about myself. "Miss Marivalli," he said. His voice was exactly as I remembered, smooth, controlled, giving nothing away. "Your Majesty," I replied, and executed what I hoped was an acceptable curtsy. I'd practiced last night, but I was approximately 60% sure I'd just done it wrong. "Please sit." There was a chair positioned across from the throne. I sat, trying to figure out what to do with my hands. Fold them? Too formal. In my lap? Too casual. I settled on an awkward combination that was definitely neither. "I've reviewed your file," Emperor Cashin continued. "You work as a scribe in the Merchant's Archive." "Yes, Your Majesty. I organize trade documents and contracts. It's actually more interesting than it sounds. Last month we had this dispute over silk imports where both parties had technically valid claims, and we had to trace back through 7 years of records to figure out." I stopped abruptly.
Sorry.
"I'm talking too much. That happens when I'm nervous." Which I am. Obviously. For the first time, something flickered in his expression. It might have been amusement. It was hard to tell. "I see. And why do you think you were selected for consideration?" Honest answer? "I have absolutely no idea, Your Majesty. I'm pretty sure there's been some kind of administrative error." His eyebrow, just one, rose slightly. "You believe the Imperial Selection Committee made a mistake? I mean, have you met me? I'm not exactly Empress material. I talk constantly, I ask too many questions, and according to literally every person I've ever had feelings for, I'm too much." I made air quotes, then immediately regretted it. "You probably weren't supposed to make air quotes at the Emperor." Emperor Cashin was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those intense gray eyes. I couldn't read his expression at all. He could have been fascinated or completely appalled, and I'd have no idea which. "Too much," he repeated finally, his tone thoughtful.
Yeah.
"Too enthusiastic. Too chatty. Too, you know." I gestured vaguely at myself. "Just generally too much of everything." "I see." Another pause. "And this has led you to conclude you're not suitable for marriage?" "Not just marriage. Any kind of romantic relationship, really. I've been rejected so many times I've actually lost count, which is saying something because I'm usually pretty good with numbers." I was definitely talking too much now, but the words kept coming. "My last crush literally changed their daily route to avoid running into me at the market." That's dedication to not liking someone. Something definitely changed in his expression then. His lips, which had been set in a firm line, curved slightly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "That must have been difficult," he said, and his voice had lost some of its formal edge. "It was character building," I replied. "Or, at least that's what my mother keeps saying. Personally, I think my character was fine before, but apparently the universe disagreed." This time, he definitely almost smiled. We talked for maybe 20 more minutes. He asked about my work, my family, my interests. I tried to answer normally, but normally for me meant going on tangents and asking him questions back, which probably wasn't protocol, but he didn't seem to mind. Actually, he seemed interested. He leaned forward slightly when I talked about a particularly complex contract dispute. He asked follow-up questions. And when I caught myself rambling about the organization system I developed for the archives and apologized, he said, "Please continue. It's fascinating. Fascinating." The Emperor called my filing system fascinating. When the attendant came to indicate our time was up, I felt strangely disappointed. "Thank you for your time, Miss Marivalli," Emperor Cashin said, rising from his throne. "Thank you, Your Majesty," I replied, standing and curtsying again. "And, good luck with the whole choosing a bride thing. I'm sure you'll figure it out." I turned to leave, making it about 3 steps before his voice stopped me. "Miss Marivalli?" I looked back. Yes. He was watching me with an unreadable expression, but his posture had relaxed slightly. "You're not too much," he said quietly. "You're simply yourself. That's not a flaw." I stared at him, completely speechless for possibly the first time in my life. Before I could respond, he nodded once and turned away, the audience clearly over. I walked back to my rooms in a daze, replaying those words over and over. You're not too much. Maybe I'd been wrong about Hope. They announced the decision 3 days later. 3 days of waiting in that palace, making awkward small talk with the other candidates. Lady Seraphine continued to look at me like I was a strange insect, and trying not to think about gray eyes and almost smiles. I'd convinced myself he'd choose someone else. Someone elegant and composed and appropriate. Someone who didn't ramble about filing systems. So when Helene appeared at my door with an expression I couldn't quite read and said, "The Emperor has made his selection," I was already preparing my gracious loser speech. "Miss Terrifica," she continued, and something in her tone made my heart stop. "His Majesty has chosen you." "I'm sorry, what?" "You are to be the Imperial bride." "Congratulations." I sat down heavily on the nearest chair. "He chose me?" "Me? Are you absolutely certain?" The Emperor was quite clear in his decision. "But why?" Helene's expression softened slightly, which on her severe face looked almost like sympathy. "Perhaps you should ask him yourself. He's requested to see you this afternoon." The afternoon meeting was in his private study, not the throne room, which somehow made it more nerve-wracking. This felt personal rather than official. Emperor Cashin was standing by a window when I entered, looking out over the palace gardens. He'd ditched the formal robes for simpler attire, though simpler still meant finely tailored and probably worth more than I'd make in a year. "Your Majesty," I said, curtsying. He turned, and for a moment I saw something cross his face. Relief? "Lyra, please sit." He'd used my first name. That felt significant. I sat in one of the chairs near his desk. He took the other one, not the one behind the desk, which felt deliberately less formal. "I imagine you have questions," he said. "So many questions. Starting with, why me?" Emperor Cashin leaned back slightly, studying me with that intense gaze. "Honestly? Please. Because in our conversation, you were the only person who spoke to me like I was simply a person rather than a title." He paused. "You asked me questions. You told me about your work with genuine enthusiasm. You apologized for talking too much, then kept talking anyway because you couldn't help yourself." I felt my face heat. "That doesn't sound like a recommendation." "It was refreshing," he said quietly. "Do you have any idea how isolating this position is? How many conversations I have where every word is calculated, where people tell me what they think I want to hear rather than what they actually think."
I hadn't thought about it that way.
"That sounds awful." "It is." He met my eyes directly. "You were honest. Even when honesty made you vulnerable. Even when you were convinced I'd reject you." His expression turned wry. "You told me you thought there'd been an administrative error." "There's still time for that to be true," I muttered. This time he actually smiled. A real smile, small but genuine, and it transformed his entire face. He looked younger suddenly, less like an untouchable emperor, and more like someone my age carrying too much weight. "I should be honest with you as well," he continued. "This marriage is, in part, political. The council has been pressuring me to wed for 2 years. But I refused to choose someone simply because they were appropriate." He paused. "I wanted a partner, not an ornament. Someone who might actually want to know me, not just the crown." "And you think I'm that person?" "I think," he said carefully, "that you might be willing to try. If you're willing." Here's the thing about Emperor Cashin in that moment. He looked uncertain. This powerful, commanding figure looked genuinely worried I might say no. "Okay," I said. "I have conditions." His eyebrow rose. "Conditions?" "First, you have to actually talk to me. Not imperial pronouncements, actual conversations. Like normal people." "Agreed." "Second, I'm going to ask you probably 1,000 questions about everything, because that's who I am and you can't get annoyed." A slight smile. "I find your questions engaging." "Third, if at any point this isn't working, if we realize we've made a mistake, we figure it out together. Honestly." He nodded slowly. "Those seem reasonable." "Then yes," I said. "I'm willing to try." His shoulders relaxed, and the relief on his face was unmistakable. "Thank you. I should probably warn you," I added. "I'm definitely going to embarrass you at some point. Multiple points. It's kind of my specialty." "I'm counting on it," he said, and this time his smile was almost playful. Maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be a disaster. The first month of being engaged to an emperor was exactly as weird as you'd imagine. There were etiquette lessons I was terrible, Dress fittings, I got stabbed by pins constantly, and endless meetings about wedding plans, so many opinions about floral arrangements. But through it all, there were also afternoons with Cashin. That's what he asked me to call him when we were alone. Cashin. Just Cashin. We'd have tea in his study, and I'd tell him about my day. Usually some social disaster I'd stumbled into, and he'd listen with that focused attention that made me feel heard in a way I never had before. Then I'd ask him about his work, and slowly, carefully, he'd open up. Turned out the Emperor was funny. Dry, subtle humor that would sneak up on you. And thoughtful. And surprisingly anxious about whether he was doing a good job. You've reformed the tax system and resolved a border dispute peacefully, I pointed out one afternoon. I think you're doing fine. The council disagrees with my position on the new trade agreements. The council members own the companies that would lose profits from those trade agreements. They're biased. He looked at me surprised. You've been reading the policy briefings? Obviously. If I'm going to be Empress, I should probably know what's happening in the Empire. I paused. Also, they're really interesting. Did you know the northern provinces have been systematically underfunded for 15 years? That conversation lasted 3 hours. Cashin pulled out maps and budget documents, and we spread them across his study floor like kids working on a school project. He explained the complex political situations, and I pointed out patterns in the numbers he hadn't noticed. You're brilliant, he said at one point, looking up from a spending report. I laughed. I'm a good organizer. That's different. No, he said firmly. You see connections other people miss. You ask the right questions. He paused. I've been trying to solve the northern funding issue for 2 years. You've been looking at it for 2 hours and already identified 3 potential solutions. I felt my face heat with pleasure. Well, when you put it that way. Lyra. He waited until I met his eyes. You belong here. Something in my chest loosened, a knot I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was there. Thanks, I said quietly. The wedding was elaborate, public, and mildly terrifying. I smiled and waved and tried not to trip over my ceremonial robes. I succeeded mostly. When Cashin took my hands during the vows, his grip was steady, grounding. You're doing perfectly, he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. The reception was endless. I met approximately 6,000 nobles whose names I'd never remember. Lady Seraphine congratulated me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My parents cried happy tears and kept asking if this was really happening. Still think it's an administrative error? Cashin asked during a rare, quiet moment. The jury's still out, I replied, and he laughed, actually laughed, in front of the entire court, which caused several nearby nobles to look scandalized. I was starting to really like making him laugh. The wedding night was its own kind of awkward. We ended up sitting on the edge of our absolutely massive bed, still in our formal attire, both clearly uncertain about expectations. So, I said finally, this is weird. Monumentally weird, he agreed. We don't have to. I mean, there's no pressure to. I gestured vaguely. Agreed. He looked relieved. We should probably figure out how to be married before adding additional complications. Exactly. Thank you. I paused. Although I should probably figure out how to get out of this dress first. There are 17 buttons I can't reach. He helped me with the buttons very properly, very carefully, and I helped him with his ceremonial sash, which had somehow become impossibly knotted. We ended up laughing at the absurdity of it all. I like you, I said suddenly. Cashin looked at me, something warm in his usually guarded eyes. I like you too. Good. Because I think we're legally stuck with each other now. Legally and thoroughly stuck, he agreed and smiled. Over the following months, something shifted. The careful formality between us dissolved into genuine partnership. Cashin started seeking my opinion on policies. I started sitting in on council meetings, which scandalized the older council members, but Cashin told them to deal with it. We developed routines, morning tea together, evening walks in the gardens, late-night conversations about everything and nothing. I learned that Cashin was an insomniac who worried constantly about making the right decisions. That he'd lost his mother young, and his father had been distant and demanding. That underneath the Imperial Reserve, he was deeply kind and desperately lonely. He learned that I really did ask 1,000 questions. That I had strong opinions about seemingly everything. That I'd give genuine advice even when it wasn't what he wanted to hear. You told the High General his military strategy was unnecessarily aggressive and probably compensating for something, Cashin said one evening, sounding both horrified and amused. It was. And you agreed with me during the actual meeting. I phrased it more diplomatically. Your way takes longer. He pulled me closer on the garden bench we were sharing. You're going to give half the court heart attacks. But not you. You keep me on my toes. He paused. I like that. The moment I knew I actually loved him, not just liked him or enjoyed his company, but loved him, was embarrassingly simple. We were in his study late one evening, working through a complex judicial reform proposal. I was pacing, gesturing wildly as I explained a potential issue with the appeals process. Cashin was watching me with that focused attention, occasionally interjecting questions or concerns. I stopped mid-sentence, suddenly aware that he was smiling. Not his small, careful smile. A full, genuine smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. What? I asked. You're extraordinary, he said simply. You know that. And the way he looked at me, like I was precious, like I was exactly right, like every part of me that had been too much for everyone else was exactly enough for him, made my heart do something complicated in my chest. I love you, I blurted out, then immediately panicked. Sorry, I didn't mean to just, that probably wasn't. Cashin stood and crossed to me in 3 strides. He cupped my face gently, his thumb brushing my cheek. Lyra. Yes. I've been in love with you since our second conversation, when you asked me if being emperor was as exhausting as it looks and actually waited for an honest answer. His gray eyes were impossibly soft. I love you. Your questions, your enthusiasm, your complete inability to be anything other than authentically yourself. All of it. Then he kissed me, and it felt like every rejection I'd ever experienced had been leading me exactly here, to this person, to this moment. When we finally pulled apart, I was grinning. So, that's a yes on the loving each other thing? Definitively yes, he confirmed and kissed me again. Turns out, being empress suited me. Not the ceremonial parts. I still regularly scandalized the court with my informal demeanor and tendency to ask uncomfortable questions during state dinners. But the actual work? The policies, the reforms, the endless puzzle of trying to make an empire function better? That I loved. Cashin and I made a surprisingly effective team. He was strategic and diplomatic. I was direct and saw patterns. He carefully considered all angles. I pushed for action. Together, we actually got things done. The northern funding problem? Solved within our first year of marriage. I'd organized the data. Cashin had navigated the political pushback, and we'd reallocated resources over the council's objections. The northern provinces had sent a delegation to thank us, and I'd cried happy tears in front of everyone, which Cashin later told me was diplomatically effective because it showed we genuinely cared. I'm not crying strategically, I'd protested. I just have feelings. I know, he'd said, kissing my forehead. That's what makes it effective. I'd also, somewhat accidentally, become the people's empress. I talked to citizens during public events, like actually talked, asked about their lives, remembered details. I visited schools and hospitals. I advocated for reforms that the council thought were too progressive, and when they pushed back, I pushed harder. You're going to cause a political incident. One particularly stuffy council member warned me after I'd publicly criticized the inequality in educational access. Good, I'd replied. Maybe then someone will actually fix it. Cashin had bitten back a smile during that exchange, and later told me I was magnificent when I was indignant. Then he'd helped me draft a formal education reform proposal, because that's what we did. We supported each other's chaos. About 2 years into our marriage, I was having tea with a visiting diplomat when she asked me, somewhat boldly, "Is it true you were selected from common birth?" My family were merchants, not nobility, I confirmed. Why? It's just unconventional. I wondered if you found the transition difficult. I thought about it honestly. At first, yes. But I think the assumption that only people born to power can handle power is kind of ridiculous. Leadership is about making good decisions and caring about people, not about having the right parents. She smiled. The emperor chose well. He really did. I agreed, and we both laughed. That evening, I told Cashin about the conversation while we were getting ready for bed. You know what's funny? I said, watching him in the mirror as he helped me with my necklace clasp, a routine we'd fallen into. All those crushes who rejected me? I ran into Marcus last month at a merchants conference. He tried to flirt with me. Cashin's hands stilled on the clasp. Did he? It was extremely awkward for him. I introduced him to you very formally, and you gave him your imperial emperor face, you know, the intimidating one, and he turned bright red. I don't have an intimidating face, Cashin protested. You absolutely do. You're doing it right now, actually. He finished with the necklace and turned me to face him, his expression softening. Should I be concerned about your former crushes trying to flirt with you? Not even remotely. I put my arms around his neck. Turns out I don't need the validation of people who couldn't see my worth. I have a husband who thinks my endless questions are engaging and my tangents are enlightening. They are, he said seriously. Though I prefer other adjectives. Beautiful.
Brilliant.
Occasionally infuriating in the best possible way. That's 3 adjectives. You deserve multiple adjectives. He kissed me softly. You deserve everything. Here's what I'd learned. The revenge isn't in making former crushes regret their choices. The revenge is building a life so fulfilling, so genuinely happy, that their rejection becomes irrelevant. Those no's had hurt at the time, but they'd pushed me towards something better than I'd imagined. I'd gone from being too much to being exactly enough. And it turned out, the right person didn't just tolerate my enthusiasm and endless chatter, he loved it. Cashin actively encouraged me to be myself, even when myself was a lot. Remember our first conversation? I asked him one night, lying in bed with my head on his chest. You told me I wasn't too much, that being myself wasn't a flaw. I meant it, I know, but I didn't believe you then. I propped myself up to look at him. I believe you now. His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb tracing my cheekbone.
Good.
Because you're precisely the right amount of everything. That's very romantic for someone who claims not to be good at romance. I have an excellent teacher, he said, pulling me down for a kiss. She talks a lot, asks impossible questions, and somehow made an emotionally repressed emperor fall hopelessly in love with her. Hopelessly? I teased. Completely hopelessly. If you told teenage me, the girl crying over yet another rejection, convinced she was fundamentally unlikable, that she'd end up here, she never would have believed it. But here's what I wish I could tell her. Those people who said you were too much, they were wrong. You weren't too much. They were too limited to appreciate you. And one day, you're going to find someone who thinks you're too much is exactly right. Someone who'll ask you to keep talking even when you apologize for rambling. Someone who'll love every enthusiastic, chaotic, questioning part of you. And maybe, just maybe, that someone will be an emperor. The throne room where I'd first met Cashin was being used for a state dinner. I stood at the entrance, watching him across the room in his formal imperial attire, talking with foreign dignitaries. He looked every inch the powerful emperor, commanding, composed, untouchable. Then he caught my eye and smiled. Not his public smile, but the real one, the one reserved just for me. The one that transformed his entire face and made him look like the man I had breakfast with this morning, who'd gotten syrup in his hair and laughed when I'd pointed it out. I smiled back, and his expression turned warmer. Lady Seraphine swept past me, elegant as always. Still surprising to see a scribe wearing the imperial crown, she murmured. Former scribe, I corrected cheerfully. Current empress.
And you know what?
It fits perfectly. Because it did. Not because I'd changed who I was, but because I'd finally found a place where being exactly myself was not just accepted but celebrated. Cashin crossed the room toward me, offering his arm. Ready, my love? Always, I said, taking it. And as we walked into that throne room together, him steady and reserved, me animated and probably talking too much, I couldn't help but think. Best administrative error ever.